All right. Thanks everybody for coming. This is great to have all of you here, and I expect we'll get some more people trickling in as we get past the hour. So I just wanted to welcome everybody, and we're going to do a brief intro here, and then I'm going to pass it off to Rob Green as our first speaker to tell us about the EMIT mission. So Andrew, if you can head forward here. So this is the team that's presenting here today, though I think we've got a couple people we need to start getting on here better. Bree needs to put herself on here, and Erin from the LP DAAC as well. So this has been a great team effort, and we're really happy to have some tutorials to work through with you today. You want to go ahead one more, Andrew? And I just wanted to do a quick introduction of the people who have registered for this. So we had over 200 people register with a variety of different types of interests in methane emissions and interests in using these data sets. And so we're going to try to kind of keep this fairly broad and kind of think about the theory behind what we're observing here and how EMIT data can be used for understanding large methane enhancements. So I do want to say that we're going to have the chat restricted to something where you can chat with the co-hosts only, not with the full group. And then the Q&A is where we'll be answering questions. And that's just so that we can provide you all with some more links in the chat and they don't end up getting buried. And then we can also track your questions a little bit more clearly. So that'll kind of be how that's set up. So with that, Andrew, you want to go to the next? And so this is our agenda. So we're going to start out with Rob Green, who is the PI of EMIT, and he's going to start us off here with an introduction.
All right, hopefully you can hear me, and I'll go fairly quickly. All right, I want to again welcome everybody, and my job here is to introduce you to EMIT and what it stands for and how it came into existence. It's currently on the International Space Station and has entered an extended mission. There's a wonderful video there, link, if you want to go see the launch and the installation process, which was compiled by the project system engineer. So rather than show it here, I'll let you access that if you're interested. All right, next, please. So how did EMIT come into existence? NASA had a call to propose missions for something called the Earth Venture Instrument Opportunity, and it was open to any instrument that people thought was meritorious. We got together with some scientists and realized there was a gap in our knowledge as it relates to the mineral dust cycle on our planet, and I'll connect that to methane eventually. It does quite nicely. And so we understood and formulated a set of objectives that are related to the state of knowledge at the time we proposed, which is that Earth system models were modeling this dust cycle with only 5,000 measurements for the entire planet Earth, for the air-land regions of the planet Earth. That's not sufficient. It's viewed as a heroic extrapolation, in fact. We realized with our EMIT solution, we could update that with 1 billion direct mineral composition determinations, and that's what we're doing. And of course, the dust cycle has all these different elements. Our focus is on radiative forcing, how it heats or cools our planet, but it interacts in many other ways, and I'll let you follow up on that as you wish. Next. So how are we going to get 1 billion observations of mineral samples through the air lands of the planet in a year or less? Well, the way we're going to do that is with an imaging spectrometer. And NASA invented imaging spectroscopy in the last century, actually. The first imaging spectrometer was built by NASA and flew in 1982. There's a picture of it there, that small box in that column of spectrometers. But the idea, these instruments move along the surface of an object, a planet, our planet in this case, and they have a cross-track swath. And for every element in that swath, they collect a spectrum via telescope and a spectrometer. So we have the spectral fingerprint. In this case, for EMIT, we measure from 380 to 2500 nanometers. So that's a broad range. We have 285 spectral wavelengths. And in that range are the fingerprints of the minerals that we need to model the Earth's dust cycle. It's also that range that contains the methane and carbon dioxide signatures, which are focused here. So that's the synergy that let us end up with EMIT, which is relevant for methane. And we collect those data and calibrate them and deliver the mineral products and also methane products and in future other products. Next. So in a nutshell, the type of measurement we're making is that we're looking at light that is by and large coming from the sun. Fires and flares would be exceptions, but basically light over that full range is coming. And that center red curve is basically what the spectrum from the sun looks like at the top of the Earth's atmosphere. On the upper right, you're seeing an EMIT image cube. It's the first image cube EMIT collected back in 2022. And in the lower center, you're seeing three spectra that were measured by EMIT, and they don't look the same as the spectrum of the sunlight arriving at the top of the atmosphere. They've collected the molecular fingerprints of the Earth system in that path from the sun through the atmosphere to the surface, interacting with matter, minerals, etc., plants, back up to the atmosphere to our instrument. And it's those fingerprints that we can access if we're looking for minerals or other objectives, including if we want to look at where is methane occurring and carbon dioxide occurring in fairly high concentration. So that's the cornerstone. That's an imaging spectroscopy or remote measurement. It's more than remote sensing, I would say. Next. Now, what we did, and I'm very fortunate to be at JPL, which I think is the only place that could have done this in quite this way, is we built an absolute state-of-the-art imaging spectrometer. These are hard instruments. We have 285 wavelengths. We have 1,200 cross-track samples. We're measuring 300,000 spectra a second. When I was in graduate school some time ago, it took about 10 minutes to collect one good spectrum. We're now collecting 300,000 equivalent spectra per second with EMIT. And this team of engineers and scientists developed that over 41 months through COVID, and it launched on the 14th of July 2022, which is also Bastille Day. Next. Some of the insights there. And it's working beautifully well. When it arrived on orbit, it worked the way we expected. That doesn't always happen. It did for EMIT. So we are now collecting these things we call image cubes, where we collect an image with a spectrum for every point of that image. We calibrate them to radiance, which is what arrives at the instrument. In this case, for minerals, we suppress the atmosphere and look at the mineral signatures, get the fingerprints of the minerals, look at a library of minerals, and produce our mineral maps. And again, this is not about methane here, but this is the prime reason that EMIT was selected. So we're fulfilling that objective as we must for NASA. That's our contract with NASA. But you get the advantage that EMIT is now on orbit and can be used for other things, including methane. Next. Where have we measured? The data you have access today was largely the arid land regions of the Earth, which was our target mask for EMIT's prime mission. Those blue little squares are where we have data sets that you can access from the LP DAAC right now onto your phone if you wish. And so the LP DAAC is just extraordinary part of the team in making these data available, and you'll learn more about that as we go forward. So that's what we have now. And then I'll talk about the excitement of the extended mission and what we'll be looking at in the future, just as I wrap up. Next. An example of the prime mission, this is a mineral map of the major dust source region of planet Earth, which is Africa and Arabia, and there are hundreds of millions of observations, again, replacing less than 1,000 in this area existing samples. And so we're right on track to achieve the prime mission objectives, which relate to the mineral dust cycle. And it also produces a spectacular product, which could be used for other objectives as well. Next. And just as I wrap up here, the Earth is rich with spectral signatures in this part of the spectrum, and EMIT is measuring them all with its complete spectrometer solution, and the atmosphere, of course, highlighted up there on the right, but it relates to geology, terrestrial ecosystems, aquatic, coral, water, hazards, oil spills, snow and ice. They all have spectral signatures that we can interrogate to pursue science and applications or Earth action. And I think my last charge is the next one, and then I'll pass it on. But we're really excited to announce that EMIT has entered an extended mission on the 31st of January, 2024, where we're broadening our objectives. We're asked to be relevant to many more things, including NASA campaigns, greenhouse gases. So we'll be emphasizing greenhouse gases in areas that EMIT hasn't looked previously, and that's exciting. Calibration, we're going to be collecting the continental United States, and then moving on to glaciers, tropical forests, and other applications And we're just so excited to have this. And this is going to take us a year or so to collect these data sets. But I want to remind you, there is a mission following EMIT. It's called SBG VSWR, and it's a decadal survey mission that NASA has begun. It will collect this area every 16 days, pole to pole. And so that's what we're also preparing for, is wall-to-wall coverage every 16 days with full spectroscopy. And we're also excited about where that's going to position us in the future. So everything you're learning today and everything you're going to be able to do today, there's an order of magnitude more capability coming thanks to NASA and guidance from the decadal survey. So with that, I'll wrap it up and hand it on to the rest of the team for the rest of this conversation.
Thanks so much, Rob. We have a couple quick questions in the chat here that I think you'll be very happy to answer. One of them is, how long will the EMIT sensor be on the ISS?
So right now we've got an extended mission as long as EMIT keeps working through 2026, and then we've been asked if we're still working in that time frame to put in another proposal for a further extension. So we think we know we have a place as long as we're working and NASA can fund us through the quote end of the life of the space station, which currently may be talked about the 2030 time frame.
Great. And then you're kind of mentioning it here, but were there any plans of having a dedicated satellite with the EMIT sensor? And so I think you spoke a bit about SBG VSWR. So
yeah, absolutely. SBG VSWR, we're all so excited. EMIT is pushing the envelope at 300,000 spectra a second. SBG VSWR will be 1.5 million spectra per second with 30-meter spatial sampling. So EMIT is at 60. So it's just extraordinary. And it's something we all want to be looking forward to and letting people and NASA know how important this is to build on what we're learning with EMIT today. So thank you for those questions. Those are wonderful.
Great. Thank you so much. Excellent. And then before we hand it over to Andrew Thorpe, who's the greenhouse gas lead on EMIT, we're going to have a brief technical interlude here. So Andrew, if you could go to the next slide here. So a part of this tutorial is going to be very interactive, and I think many of you signed up and sent your GitHub handles in, and so we want to have you guys starting to get the cloud workspace spun up for yourselves at this point, because it can take a little bit of time. Eric, did you want to say something on this point here? And I think we're going to drop some information in the chat for everyone here as well.
Yeah, sure. So the cloud workspace we're going to use, it's basically a Python Jupyter Hub. And so you want to select here in your server options, you want to use Python. I'm sorry, maybe I should take a step back. So when you follow this link, you'll be asked to log in using your GitHub account. And so if you sort of follow that process, you'll be prompted which sort of workspace instance you want to launch. I don't have a good preview of that, but maybe people can let us know if they're having issues.
And I just put the link into the chat for folks.
Yeah, thanks. But after you authenticate using your GitHub, you'll just want to select this medium-sized instance that's like 14.7 gigabytes and launch that on Python. And then by clicking this link, you're also going to be cloning the repository that has the notebooks we're going to work with. And so eventually you should load in to a screen that looks sort of like this. I guess I can share my screen real quick. It'll look sort of like this, and you'll have sort of this launcher on the right, and then you'll have your directory menu on the left. So if you guys can just go ahead and start that process, like Dana mentioned, this will get us ready to move through the notebooks when we get to that section.
Yeah. And Eric, could you or Bree or Aaron drop the direct link in? Some folks aren't able to use tiny URLs. They're blocked by some organizations.
Definitely.
Great, thank you.
So that should be the link. That's not tiny URL.
Great, and then I also want to point out that we have a breakout session that is going to be just running in the background continuously during this workshop, so that if you need technical help, just you can assign yourself into that breakout session and then come back when you're done. So we have people there who are going to be able to help you with getting any of this set up if you are running into trouble. So please do take advantage of that so that we can, kind of keep things moving, but that will give you some extra resources. Great, and so it looks like some people are reporting that it worked for them, which I appreciate. And if let's see. And if people would like to be added to the GitHub now, I think please send a chat to Bree and Aaron or all of the co-hosts. Okay. Anything else you want to say right now, Aaron, or should we get into the more of the intro of the greenhouse gas piece? Aaron or Eric? Sorry, I guess Aaron might be in the breakout room.
I think we're good.
Okay, great. Andrew, you want to go to the next slide then? I think that this is troubleshooting issues. So if folks do end up having some trouble, they'll be able to help out in the breakout rooms too. So, all right, Andrew, take it. Oh, yes, sorry. We had one other thing, which is that we have been working really hard to have this be open source resource and space, and we would love it if people are interested in contributing back to any of these resources and building kind of on the work that has already been done by this team. And so please consider this to be a community resource, and we look forward to continuing to work with you all in the future. So now you can take it away, Andrew.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. I hope you get a general sense for how we can use EMIT methane data, and look forward to future opportunities to keep discussing some of these capabilities with you if you're interested. Let's go ahead and get to my slides. So just to start off, what are we measuring for our EMIT methane measurements? You saw this figure on the left that was presented by Rob Green earlier, but I wanted to talk just a little bit about how we actually map out our methane enhancements. The sun is emitting photons. Those photons are interacting with the atmosphere through scattering and absorption. It's reflecting off of the surface of the Earth and up into our instrument EMIT on the International Space Station. The measurements that are acquired with EMIT are reflected solar radiation at over 200 spectral channels from the visible through the shortwave infrared. And you can see 3 different radiance spectra here for different image pixels within a given scene. For the traditional kind of EMIT surface spectroscopy applications like the mineral mapping, we have to do some atmospheric correction to generate reflectance spectra, as shown here for the 3 different radiance spectra that are provided. However, we are very interested in the atmosphere as well for this application, and luckily we do have a number of atmospheric absorptions that are present over the entire electromagnetic spectrum from the visible through the shortwave infrared, shown here, water vapor, other species like carbon dioxide and methane. And the focus today will be the methane absorption features that are present in the shortwave infrared, the longer wavelengths that we measure in the 2100 to 2500 nanometer wavelength region. So it is these gas absorption features that make methane a greenhouse gas, and it allows us to generate methane data products, which we'll be highlighting today. So these data products are currently available through the LP DAAC. So thanks to the LP DAAC team for working with our team to get these results into the world. We are providing all radiance data for EMIT data through the LP DAAC. We are also serving up methane maps of enhancements, as well as delineated methane plumes. These are level 2B data products. We are also working on emission rate estimation and uncertainties for these observed plumes, but that's a work in progress. I do want to emphasize again that we are, as part of NASA, we support the open source science initiative, making all of the data available, all of the algorithms available. And if you're interested in those algorithms, you can take a look at these GitHub repositories that are listed here. So we've been working with the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center on this project, and the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center is a multi-agency effort with NASA, EPA, NIST, and NOAA that is looking at methane emissions at different spatial scales. There are two projects currently, we call them focus areas, that are looking at global scale methane emissions at the anthropogenic greenhouse gas emission scale for gridded data products, as well as natural greenhouse gas emissions. These typically have very coarse spatial resolution. So we're talking about tens of kilometers to hundreds of kilometers in sort of spatial extents and resolution. In contrast, the results that we'll be discussing today really focus on the local scale. So we're talking about really fine spatial resolution measurements for EMIT methane plumes at a 60-meter spatial resolution. Going forward, we're going to actually have finer spatial resolution as we incorporate additional results like airborne results. So as part of this work, we've made over 1,100 EMIT methane plumes available through the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center site. And this is enabled by our partnership with the Land Processes DAAC. The U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center is actually pulling all of the information directly from the LP DAAC and updating their database accordingly in the website. So this is a really exciting capability, and we typically are making updates at sort of a weekly cadence. So I did want to just step back a little bit and talk a little bit about the history of using these types of measurements for greenhouse gas mapping. And I guess we do have a long track record of demonstrating these capabilities. And this all began with airborne instruments that are sort of the precursor to EMIT that were developed at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, starting off with the Avarice instrument with early observations that this was possible with flights in 2008 over the Santa Barbara Channel in California to show that we could map out methane plumes on sunglint conditions, also in the LA Basin for oil and gas fields. And that was some of my early work in graduate school. Since then, we've done some really wonderful studies and pushed the science forward. My colleague David Thompson was able to publish the first detection of a super emitter event from the Hyperion satellite. This is Aliso Canyon blowout in California. We've had a number of airborne campaigns over the years demonstrating these capabilities, starting in California in 2019, extending into places like the Permian Basin, Four Corners, and the likes. In 2022, we started to observe methane plumes and CO2 plumes with the EMIT instrument after launch. And more recently, we've been using Avarice 3 for methane mapping, looking at emissions in the Western United States. And this is something that we'll be continuing to do going forward. So this track record of algorithms, publication has allowed us to generate data products quite quickly, get them to the LP DAAC with associated documentation in an open source fashion with algorithms to support our U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center. So what does the gas absorption feature actually look like? So this is an image that shows a set of methane plumes that were observed as part of the early days of EMIT. And what I'm showing in the center panel here is the spectral fingerprint of methane, which was derived by just a simple calculation. And that calculation is to look at a radiance within a methane plume itself, so that radiance would have the methane absorption features present. And we would simply divide that by the out of plume radiance for a similar surface type. And the reason we do this is that we can accentuate the methane absorption features and plot them in a way that I think is intuitive to folks. Hopefully it is intuitive. So what you can see in the plot in the center here in purple is that ratio. So basically you see a series of absorption features as accentuated by those black gray vertical lines, indicating that in fact we are seeing the methane signature. And we can go a step further and compare that with a modeled result, which is shown in black, and you can see a nice agreement between the two. So this is a way to verify that we're seeing the methane absorption spectra features. I do want to emphasize that this is not how we do our gas retrievals. This is really merely a way to give folks a sense for what we're measuring. And this will be the subject of the first, I guess, Python notebook tutorial that Aaron will be doing next.
Okay.
Great.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll share my screen here. We did, I guess if you've joined, after we sort of did our technical intro, there's some links in the chat that you can go to sort of get to this this cloud workspace that we're going to use. It's a Jupyter Lab server. You'll just click the link and then you can log in using your GitHub username, as long as you've confirmed the invitation that we sent previously. And then you'll automatically clone the GitHub repository that we're working with, and it'll bring you to a screen that looks sort of like this. If you are having issues getting connected or getting to this sort of stage, we have a breakout room open, and Aaron's sitting in there. He can help you get connected, or if you want, you can just send your GitHub username to Dana or one of the other hosts. So we'll go ahead and start out. You should have something that looks sort of like this. I'm going to zoom in a bit, sort of. It's a little easier to see. And so on the left, you have this sort of directory structure here. And then a normal, just sort of standard menu at the top. There's one tip I'm going to go ahead and go through for troubleshooting is that if there's any error or the instance crashes when you're running the Jupyter Notebook, usually you can fix that by going to this kernel menu and going to shut down all kernels, and then just close and open the notebook. And that should get you back to a point where you can recover and keep working. So here, to get to the tutorial, we're going to go through the first one about the absorption spectra. We'll go to the Python directory and then the tutorials directory. And we can open this notebook generating methane spectral fingerprints. And then I'm just going to collapse this window so so the notebook's a little easier to see. You can just do that if you want by clicking on the folder here. So in this notebook, we're basically going to do that in and out of plume ratio that Andrew discussed. So we can go ahead and start. I think he pretty much covered all the background information. So our first thing we're going to do is import the Python libraries that we use. And here we can, you can either click the play button here at the top to run this cell, or you can hold down Shift and hit Enter, and that'll run it, and that'll move you down to the next cell automatically. So after we import those, we'll go ahead and run this next cell. And what this is going to do is this is going to download the data set that we're going to use for this. It's going to download a radiance cube and then also a methane enhancement cube. And while that's downloading, I'm going to go ahead a little bit and talk about the data structure of the radiance file. So the radiance data, it's distributed in a non-orthorectified spatially raw format. And so to work with it, you'll need to orthorectify it. But it has within it a geometry lookup table that allows you to do this quickly, so you don't need to actually do any calculations. Basically, it's got a grid with cross-track and down-track indices that you can use to transform the data into geographically projected data. And so sort of the organization of this file is there's a root group, which is going to have the radiance data. And then there's a sensor band parameters, which is going to have like your wavelengths and your full width half max information. And then lastly, you'll have a location group, which is going to have that geometry lookup table and also swath latitude and longitude tags for the center of each pixel. And so there's a couple ways you can work with this data. You can open it and work with it using the netcdf4 Python library or the Xarray Python library. But here what we're going to do, there were some tools that we built for a previous workshop that basically takes this data and opens it and puts it into an Xarray data structure. And those are included in the EMIT tools.py module, which is part of the repository. And so we're going to use that to sort of do this quickly. So if we scroll back up, this is still running. So we'll use that Python library to do that. If this is slow because we have so many people trying it. Maybe now is a good time to answer a couple questions if there are any.
I have a question. Can you remind me what the full width half max is and why it's important?
So it's basically going to be the range between each band center. So the full width half max is going to be the range around each band center that's basically bend in that wavelength. This is actually taking a lot longer than it has previously.
And I guess I would just chime in that, you know, the full width half max is very important for, you know, for our greenhouse gas calculations. I don't think we're going to get into that in great detail here, but when we're doing quantitative retrievals, understanding that parameter is very important for how we parameterize our retrieval algorithms. That varies, you know, with different instruments, right? And that has implications for the sensitivity of various instruments to these greenhouse gas retrievals.
Okay, so that's finished at least for me. So like after downloading the data, we can basically assign an object to the file path for each one of those files. And then we can go ahead and open the radiance data set with this EMIT Xarray function that was in the EMIT tools module. And what that's going to do is that's going to take care of flattening all those groups I mentioned before and just put the data in a nicely organized structure and ortho-rectify it.
Hello everyone. I was struggling a little bit because my GitHub was not working somehow this person through my personal email. But I was now I'm asking do we need to download this notebook and work locally, or how do we need to do it?
Yeah, so we're providing like a cloud workspace for the workshop. So were you able at all to get onto, or I'm sorry, do you have a GitHub account you can use?
Yes, I have a GitHub account. That's why I was yeah. So now I can use it. So the notebooks are in which folder? Like data, guides, Python.
They're in the Python and then the tutorials directory.
Tutorials. Okay.
And we also have a breakout room open that you can go to get more
Okay.
help if you need it.
So how do we know
Yeah. And if you're looking for the breakout rooms, if you see the participants at the top, there's main meeting and then breakout sessions right next to it. And if you click on the breakout session, then you can join that. And that's somewhere where you can also share your screen, and Aaron can really help you be sure that you're navigating to the right spots.
Okay, that's super. So I will just go to the breakout room. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
And it looks like this is still going really slowly. So I'm gonna have somebody check in the background, do some tech support for me, see if we can find out what's going on, because like these cells should only take like maybe 10 or 15 seconds. I guess in the meantime, I guess for this first notebook, we can walk through an HTML if this continues to take a while.
Eric, I have it up and responsive. If you would like me to share and you would like to narrate, I could do that.
Okay, sure. So it looks like you were able to run down to the radiance file. So you've got the radiance object here. You can look at it and see the sort of structure of the radiance data cube. And then, so the next thing we were going to sort of do was just open the enhancement data. And so this is just in a cloud optimized GeoTIFF format. So it's a little less complicated. We can do that with the RioXarray library. And then we can just open that here, and you can see the coordinates, and then also like that it has like a spatial reference associated with it, just like our EMIT radiance cube did above. And so our next step in sort of replicating this band ratio is going to be to extract the point data. So we basically pre-selected 3 points that are in this CSV file. And you can open that with this cell into a pandas data frame. And so the ID 0 is basically in the plume, and the other two are outside of the plume. And quickly here, we'll just go ahead and set our index as the ID column. And that'll make it easier to align after we extract the data. And so we can easily extract this data using the select function from Xarray, just by providing the latitude and longitude points from this data frame and converting them into an Xarray object. And so that's done here just in this one line. And it's basically going to pick the pixel that's nearest to that coordinate. and output that data as a data frame. So we can run that cell and then the next one. And essentially we've got a nice data frame with our points. And then we have all of our associated wavelengths, radiance, full width, half max, latitude, longitude, elevation, and then our label if it's in the plume or out of the plume. And so at this point, to better visualize this, we're going to build an RGB image. And we'll just do that using the select function as well. We'll basically pick out the wavelengths we want to represent red, blue, and green. And then using the nearest method, we'll pull that data out. And then we'll rescale it to brighten it a little bit. Since it's the radiance data, the distribution is not even, and so it'll have some really dark areas. So we can rescale that. And then we'll create a HV plot object for it down below. And then essentially our next step, we're going to do the same thing for the methane enhancement data. It's only a single band, so we'll just have the one band. But here we're also going to assign the no data values to not a number, so they're transparent in our figure. And then the last sort of plotting object we'll make is one for the points. So we'll make one of those, and then we can use and combine all this together. We can stack the points on top of our maps with an asterisk, and then we can put them side by side with a plus sign. So if we run this cell, we'll have a nice sort of visual of our area of interest and the 3 points that we're going to work with.
Hello, one question. Do you hear me? Okay. I'm just curious about this. Are we going to look into how to calculate ppm, the concentration in ppm, using the reflectance?
So not exactly. In the next notebook that we talk about in a few minutes, like we'll convert our parts per million meters into kilograms for each pixel to show the integrated mass enhancement, which would be like your total amount of methane per plume.
All right. So the EMIT it already does the calculation of the concentration by measuring this radiance. Is it what it does?
So
Okay.
So the methane enhancement is essentially going to be a concentration, and maybe Andrew or someone can speak a little more to describe that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Eric's completely right. We are using data products that are already pre-existing, that are available through the LP DAAC, and he's spot on with the data products and how we're using them. I don't think we can get into the retrievals in this I guess, presentation. I'll talk a little bit about them in the next section, but it's not really within the scope of this tutorial, maybe in a future tutorial, but we can certainly pass you along information about that calculation. It is, in publications. We have open source repositories that actually allow you to download the code and try it yourself.
Yeah, I would be really interested in that if you.
Yeah. And I did
you
drop
can
the
send it to me.
links to the data to our code bases into the chat. So the EMIT SDS code bases is probably where you're going to want to look for that.
Okay, so any of those links, I can search in it and I'll find something about what I'm asking. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if we look here, there's a magnifier tool. You can zoom in a little bit just to see that the blue point is inside what's been essentially classified as a plume. It's got a higher methane concentration. and then that the two red points are outside and that they sort of have a similar surface, being in the desert in this area. So now we can look at the spectra for these points. And you can see they're fairly similar, I would say, especially in the region that we're going to look at specifically for methane, out near 2100 to 2500 nanometers. And so now what we'll do is we'll actually we'll take a look at the methane spectral signature and how to build that ratio. So we can open an existing absorption spectra, and this has been modeled. And so here we've just got a data frame with our wavelengths and values, and we can build a plot object from that and visualize it. And here we'll sort of restrict our x-axis to that range that we're interested in, the 2150 to 2450 nanometers. And we can see that distinctive sort of feature shape that Andrew showed in his presentation. And so this is the modeled methane absorption coefficient. And now what we'll do is we'll create our band ratio. So we just want to split our point data frame into two data frames, one for the point that's in the plume and one for the point that's outside of the plume. And then we'll divide the out of plume value, or I'm sorry, we'll divide the in plume values by the out of plume values to create our in over out ratio. And then we can plot that, or we can build a plot object for that, and then overlay that with our modeled methane absorption feature. And so we can see that the 2 points we picked here, the in plume, we can see that sort of shows the ratio when divided by those two out of plume ratios. And then just to kind of further illustrate this, we have an example where we've made a ratio from the two out of plume points and also visualize that next to that feature. So if you run the next couple cells, you can show sort of what would happen if we hadn't selected a pixel inside the plume as our numerator. And so you can see they're much less of a matchup. And this is just to sort of illustrate how you can preview these sort of spectral fingerprints that are present for different chemicals. And that's it for the first notebook.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric. Andrew, did you want to say anything at the end here about this notebook, or are you ready to move on? Any other?
Oh, no, thank you, Eric. This is it's very nice to see that second plot, which is a very nice diagnostic tool just to show that in the null case, you see something that doesn't correlate with the absorption feature. So I will, go ahead and transition and try to share my screen.
And just as a reminder, as we're transitioning back, if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A and I can ask them verbally. We like to do that for the recording so that folks who might be watching later can also answer that. So.
Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do with the EMIT results and kind of plans for the future. But before I kind of get into that, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we make data available ultimately as data products through the LP DAAC, and want to emphasize that we have a team at JPL that is working very hard behind the scenes to make data available, and get these weekly updates through the LP DAAC. So we are, in fact, doing manual plume identification. So we have a team here that is looking at all of the EMIT methane data products We're using a tool that was developed at JPL called the Multi-Mission Geospatial Information System that's being repurposed successfully to do this type of work. We have a series of scientists that are looking through this data set and identifying what we call plume complexes. They can be individual plumes like what we're showing here in the upper right, or they could be multiple plumes that are overlapping in some capacity. We are also being very careful about assessing, these results to ensure that we exclude examples where we don't have high confidence in the results. As a reminder, EMIT was not built to do greenhouse gases, but it is a wonderful instrument and can do amazing things, but there are some limitations and some challenges, and we do have some artifacts that make it into our retrievals that we have to be very careful about assessing. So we do that on a per plume basis. We're using additional data sets. Many of them come actually from EMIT data products that are being generated as part of our other activities. We're using our RGB imagery from EMIT at the 60-meter spatial resolution to give us some context so we know exactly what we're looking at when the EMIT observation occurs. We're looking at EMIT cloud masks, which can be very helpful to diagnose times when we don't have clear sky conditions, and that can cause some challenges for our retrievals of cloud artifacts. We're looking at EMIT mineralogy maps, which are part of the EMIT Prime deliverables for the Prime mission. That's very helpful to understand, what kinds of minerals are present in the scene. And for example, if we're seeing an artifact that is tracking with a particular mineral like a limestone, which is known to cause some artifacting, we can use that to screen out that example. And we're also using higher resolution imagery, base map imagery, just to give us a little bit more spatial context, right? Things like Google Earth style imagery, open data products through like QGIS and other mapping data products. We're also looking at multiple observations of the same location. And that can be very helpful when we see a methane plume and we maybe are scratching our head a little bit. We want to look to see if there's other observations over time, and that can help us figure out if something is a credible methane plume. One sort of very diagnostic a way that we can use this these time steps is to look for if the plume or the enhancement shifts around from scene to scene. If that is the case, that often will indicate that we have a plume that's changing its orientation relative to the local wind conditions at the time of the observation. We call that kind of like weather veining of a plume, kind of rotating around the emission source. We've got a second reviewer that comes in and does their own analysis, an assessment of the candidate plumes, basically trying to understand, if the observed plume really significantly is beyond sort of the threshold of the background noise. And you can see some examples of some of the speckle and background noise present in that image in the upper right. And then we have a final reviewer that does sort of a comprehensive analysis and of all these input parameters to ensure that we're really only sharing and making publicly available the really high confidence examples. I did want to emphasize that right now we're not doing attribution. So we are not saying that a particular methane plume is coming from a landfill or an oil and gas piece of infrastructure. However, the plumes themselves can be used to do that. And there are a number of folks that are using EMIT plumes to do their own attribution. And again, right now we're continuing to work on emission quantification. Eventually that data will be published and made available through the LP DAAC. When it comes to quantification of emissions, I did want to talk just a little bit about how we do this. We're not going to touch on this in the second notebook, but I think it's useful for folks to know how we do this. Historically, and how we've done it has been mainly on the airborne side of things. We've been developing methodologies over the last 10 years or so that we are expanding and using with EMIT. So the general principle behind how you can calculate an emission rate from a point source is you first have to delineate the methane plume as shown in that figure on the left. And then we have to calculate how many molecules of methane in excess of the background atmosphere are present within that plume. We can then combine that with a plume length and a wind speed to estimate an emission rate. And that reflects an instantaneous estimated emission rate with an uncertainty based on that one observation using an aircraft or something like EMIT, right? We've demonstrated this methodology on mostly airborne campaigns, and then more recently some EMIT data for spanning on the airborne side for the California surveys and examples from the Permian Basin and beyond. And what's very exciting about some of these regional airborne surveys, and this is illustrated in the figures in the lower right, the paper by Daniel Cusworth in 2022 that showed that the airborne methane point source emissions for different oil and gas basins in the United States are significant, on the order of 30 to 50% of the expected total emissions for a given oil and gas basin. And these were calculated using other data sets like the Tropomi instrument that can do sort of an inversion estimate for how much methane's being emitted in the Permian Basin. And we can compare that relative to what the airborne instruments like Avarice Next Generation or Avarice 3 would see on the point source side. So I think this has serious implications for both understanding, the anthropogenic contributions to methane emissions, but also it offers the potential for mitigation efforts, right? So if you know that there was a small number of emission sources that are disproportionate in their contribution to the total methane of an area, that means that if you get that data in front of people, people can conceivably use it to sort of inform mitigation strategies.
Andrew, really quick, we have a quick question in the chat, which is background methane calculated or reported? So it just seemed relevant to that.
Absolutely. So that's a great question. There are different retrieval algorithms that we have used. The differential optical absorption spectroscopy methodologies, which we are currently not using in an operational sense, would allow you to estimate the background, and we could report that. We are going in that direction. Currently, we are limited to a statistical match filter algorithm where we are currently not reporting that value. However, you can certainly look at the full steam results, which are available through the LP DAAC, and you can do your own analysis and you can look at those values scene by scene. Great, so I'm going to continue on here. So we've published an initial paper last year on some of the initial EMIT results. This is just a subset of the first 30 days of data in the Middle East and Central Asia. What you're seeing is a distribution of methane point sources spanning the oil and gas and mainly waste sectors here. And what's nice about this image is that you can see these variations from country to country, right? So Turkmenistan, which is known to have significant methane emissions, has the highest number of these points, these red points. Neighboring countries far less. So we see these regional variations in the distribution of methane emissions. So what do some of these results actually look like? This is one of the first examples that we saw with EMIT over Turkmenistan, where you're seeing distinct emission sources, right? So there are about 10 or so of these locations as indicated by these white points. And this is really the power of this type of instrument, right? We can resolve individual sources within a scene. You can actually figure out where the emissions are coming from. The EMIT instrument has an 80-kilometer wide swath. So it has a significant coverage. And so if you were thinking about this example, the EMIT swath would be much larger than what we're seeing in just this visualization. We've got over the last 2 years or so, we're starting to fill out this picture of methane point sources. We have, as I mentioned, I think before, over 1,000 examples visible through the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center, and these span the energy, waste, and agricultural sectors. The EMIT coverage, this animation needs to start. So what you're showing here, what we're showing here is the EMIT coverage over time. You can see that in the early days, the coverage was really dominated by our targeted regions of the arid regions of the world as part of the primary mission of EMIT. But going forward in the rest of 2024 and beyond, there's going to be sort of a additional sets of targets that will be included in these observations, including a focus on the United States for greenhouse gas mapping. There'll also be other needs that we need to satisfy from the vegetation community, the mineralogy community, and the sort of the aquatics community as well. But one of the great things about EMIT is that it does have the ability to map areas over time, and that's really critical to have multiple observations of a given location over time, so you can actually characterize methane emissions as they vary over time. So I wanted to just include sort of two kind of end members of methane locations where we see methane plumes. The first being a intermittent example of methane plumes. So again, when we look at a snapshot of a methane plume from EMIT, we have information only about that specific time, right, when the ISS passed overhead the location. And often methane emissions are pretty intermittent, right? So these are a few examples of the same location. The first example shows two well-defined methane plumes. One's very large, one's quite small. A few days later, we didn't see any methane plumes, right? Nothing was visible. A few months later, we've got one plume that's visible and the large methane plume is gone. And then a few months later, you've got that same small plume, just that looks a little bit different given the wind conditions. So this intermittent behavior is pretty characteristic of a lot of emission sources, and repeat observations gives us a way of tracking those emissions over time and ultimately using that information to sort of inform our understanding of what's going on here and how much methane is being emitted. The other example is the persistent case. So this is a series of snapshots for landfill in Jordan, where we see a methane plume that's persistent across all observations. And you can see again that methane plume tracking with the local wind conditions. In the second panel, I'm just emphasizing that we do have an acquisition with a lot of clouds and cloud shadows. And we want to track that because we're not able to actually do methane retrievals when we have these clouds and cloud shadows. But it's nice to be able to track that data point to ensure that we know that we had an observation, we couldn't do a methane retrieval, and put that in our accounting as we track these emissions over time. And that is going to be, I guess, the focus of the next Python notebook by Eric.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, so
Are there, real quick, are there any quick questions for Andrew before we move back onto the notebooks? We did have a question in the chat about documentation, and I just added the links there for folks so that it's available. All right. Take it away.
So I think there were a couple issues with our cloud service, but I went ahead and ran this notebook so I can kind of walk through it, and I'll pause to give people time for that. So this notebook, we're going to visualize a time series at that landfill in Jordan that Andrew mentioned. And then we'll also show what that looks like with clouds and sort of a whole processing workflow to sort of get to that stage. Similar to the past notebook, we'll import our Python libraries here. This time we are working with more files, so we'll go ahead and define a directory that we want to work with. And then we'll go ahead and start searching for our methane data. So we're going to use Earth Access, which is a Python library to do that. And what Earth Access does is it sort of simplifies the programmatic searching of data. And it basically exists on top of NASA's CMR search, but kind of simplify that for people. So what we're going to do is we're going to search using these concept IDs, which you can find on the Earth Data Search website. So we'll use the Plume's concept ID and the reflectance ID later in this tutorial. And so for our search, basically we want to define what product we're looking for and a time range. And so for this example, we're gonna find all the methane plumes that were observed during 2023. And then after we've got those results, so there's 947 plumes, we're going to use this function that's included in our tutorial utilities module to turn that into a geodata frame so we can easily visualize that. So after you turn that into a geodata frame, basically you've got all these individual plume observations, which are labeled with this native ID. And then you've got a related URLs column that's going to have all of the resources for each of those search results. And then, of course, your geometry, so you can visualize where this stuff is. This results to GeoPandas function, you can also add some additional fields to that if you want with the fields argument. And there's a couple other things that might be useful depending on what you're doing. There is a % cloud cover flag and a day and night flag, but usually that would probably be more helpful working with other instruments because we want to know like specifically where the clouds are, not just if there are a lot of them. So we'll add a column just so we can reference it in the figure that we're going to make for our index. We'll just set that equal to the index values. And then we'll build a figure using Folium. So what kind of the outline here is we're going to define a figure that's the size we want. Then we're going to add some background tiles. We'll add a Google satellite and Esri imagery. And then we'll add our geodata frame color-coded by the time frame. So you can see here, we have all these plumes that have been identified, and we've got like sort of their outline globally for the whole year. But like I said, we're going to focus over here in Jordan. You can toggle the base map layers, like if you wanted to see the Google imagery, so you can see more clearly where we're focusing in on. You can. The Esri imagery is maybe a little cleaner looking if you're trying to look at the surface. And so we're going to focus here on this landfill in Jordan. We tell there's quite a few plumes here. And if we just want to select these plumes, so what I'm going to do here is I'm basically going to build a bounding box around this green plume, this other green plume, and this orange plume. So we focused in on this area here. And so we added an index. So when we hover, we can see the index. We can just kind of create a list of these indices and then take that and pull out the geometry for those locations in the data frame and turn that into a separate data frame that's just our bounding box. And so then we'll have just this bounding box here, and we can remake our figure again where we just have added that, just to confirm that works as intended. And so now that we're kind of focused in on this area, we can save that Plume bounding box to a file. And we can also filter our original search results using that bounding box. And so that'll give us this new Plume geodata frame, which only has, I think it has about 15 results here. So we've narrowed it down from our thousands of results just to this spatial area. And if we had already known where we wanted to narrow this down to, we could have done that in the search. But since we kind of wanted to manually identify that, we left the search blank. And it looks like there's a question.
Yeah, hi, I just wanted to ask you, so it's not like how we used to extract like land surface temperature data. You don't give lat and long here, or like I was not in the first part because I was still in the breakout room. So you don't give a lat and long for the location where you want to extract the methane plume. You go the other way. So I didn't get it. How you chose the location?
Oh, for the bounding box, you mean?
Yes. Yeah.
So the latitude and longitudes are in the GeoData data frame geometry column. So basically, we have a polygon that's going to represent each of these. And what we did was we used the indexes to select the 3 plumes that basically extended the furthest out from our source, and then use that to build a bounding box. So we selected those 3, and then basically we drew a box around them.
And what about like if we have a location in mind, like say for an example, I want to know certain region, like I have the lat and long. So we can, that should also be possible to do it like that, no?
Yes. So up in the search section, you can provide a polygon, or you can provide a list of coordinates.
Okay.
And then that'll just find any plumes that intersect with those.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. So after we've sort of filtered this down to our Plume geodata frame, we want to actually grab the data. So that we get that from these URLs listed here. So if we just print what one of those looks like, it's a list of a bunch of URLs and their labels. And what we can do is we can write a function to grab the one we want from that, basically. And then since the one we want is a JSON metadata file, we can use the requests library to go ahead and pull that data for each asset that we want. So if you go ahead and run these 4 cells, this one here takes a while to grab all the metadata. And so basically for each row, we're going to grab this metadata, and it looks something like this. It's got our concentration uncertainty, and then it's got like your plume ID, your maximum concentration, and then it's got a latitude and longitude of the maximum concentration. And that's some information we can also visualize. So after we've fetched all that data, which may take a minute or 2, we can open this new data frame, which is basically all of our metadata organized by our Plume index number. And then we can add that to our figure. So we can, sorry, I skipped over something. We need to make it into a geodata frame first. We have the coordinates here for the points, but we actually need a geometry column. And so we can define that for each row in the data frame and then add that. So we're basically adding this column here on the right. that's a point geometry, and it has that information. And then we can add that to our visualization. And so we can see here, we have like color coded, like our by date, like our points and the plume. And so we can get an idea of where the highest concentration is within each plume, just using vector data without having to actually open any of the files yet. And so the next sort of thing we're going to do is we're going to actually create a time series from the cloud optimized GeoTIFF plume data. And so our first step here, we want to retrieve the URL for each of those files. And so we can use our get asset URL and apply it to our data frame to grab that link from each of the related links. So now that we've got a list of all the files we're going to use, we can stream those using Rio Xarray. We just need to provide our authentication information using Earth Access. And so the way we're going to do that is set these GDAL configuration options. And that way it's going to provide our Earth data credentials that are stored in a cookie file to, excuse me, provide those credentials. And so this function kind of gets a little bit complicated. Essentially, what we want to do here in this section is we want to open each of those links above. And then we're going to squeeze the band dimension, which basically is going to take each raster from a 3D array to a 2D array, so we can stack them later. And it's going to merge any of the plumes that were collected on the same date. So since we're building the time series, we only want basically one scene for each time or each acquisition time. And so that's simply going to put them in the same grid. And so we can run this cell, and that's going to open all of our files and place them in a list that we can use later. So after we have all those open, we want to put them all on a common grid. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through our list of data that we have locally now and find the minimum and maximum latitude and longitudes, and then reproject or create a grid with the same resolution that we can project all of our files to. So we run this common grid function to give us a common grid. And this is essentially based on the extent of the bounding box that we provided before. And so we can reproject all of our files in our list, in our dictionary to that common grid. And then after we've reprojected them, we can build an array, or a Xarray variable that is basically our time series using the timestamp, which is the key for that dictionary that I built above. And so after we have like all of our times, we can basically just stack our two-dimensional arrays and have our time series all on the same grid to show all the plumes over our region of interest. And then one last thing I'll do before we visualize it is set the fill values equal to not a number. And that's just so they show up as transparent. And then we'll build a plot object and plot it. And we'll end up with our methane plumes over the scene on a common grid so we can work with them easily. If you scroll through the times here, you can update and see each plume and sort of where it's coming from. And then our next step here is going to be to calculate how much methane is in each plume, which is also known as the integrated mass enhancement. And basically here, what we're going to do is we're going to take each pixel value, which is in parts per million meters, and do a unit conversion, so we end up in kilograms. So like we'll divide by parts per meters, and then we'll multiply by our pixel area, which is 60 meters by 60 meters, and that'll get us to a volume in meters cubed. And then we can convert that to liters, and then from liters to moles, because we're going to assume that we've just got 22.4 liters of gas per mole. And then from there to using the molar mass to just a mass. Essentially, we can take that and we can build a function to do that for a single plume, and then we can apply that across our entire time series, and we'll end up with basically a single number for each observation. And then if we visualize that, we can see here how many kilograms of methane are in each plume, and when these observations occurred. And you can see that the revisit period, because the sensors on the space station, is not consistent. So there's a lot of gaps here. But one other thing that might be the case is that there's not a plume detected, since the methane plume complexes are only produced if there is a plume detected. So we sort of want to get a better picture of what's going on at the landfill. Like there might be clouds obstructing it, like Andrew had mentioned. And so the way we can do that is we can basically do another search, and we can look at the reflectance data. And so to do our reflectance data search, I have selected a smaller bounding box. I just made a bounding box around the maximum concentrations, and that's just to reduce the quantity of results by a little bit, because we really want results that are only focused on our target area and maybe don't just have a corner of the overpass intersecting. And so we can do another search with Earth access. And here we'll provide the reflectance concept ID. And in addition to the date range, we'll go ahead and provide this region of interest, which is just a smaller polygon. We can turn that into a geodata frame. And here we've got 20 results, as opposed to, I believe there were 12 in our time series. So we have like 8 overpasses where potentially we may be able to glean some information. And so we can visualize our geodata frame again here. And these will just have the extent of the overpass. And so you can see these are all the overpasses. And this kind of gives you a little bit of perspective as to the size of an overpass versus the size of the plumes we're looking at. Like, so they are pretty small. And you can see also that some of these aren't really going to have relevant information because maybe they're only barely intersecting this polygon. And that's something in this tutorial that could still be improved, admittedly, how we did that. But similar process to above, we want to get the URLs. And so for the reflectance, we're not actually going to use the reflectance file for this. We're going to use the browse image because we just want sort of an RGB to build a background. And then we're also going to use the mask data because it has a cloud mask. And so we can take the cloud mask data and layer it on top of the RGB to sort of see more clearly where there are clouds that are potentially disrupting detection of methane. So we can get our browse URLs, and we can also get our mask URLs. And then at this point, one thing you can do is actually save these to a text file. You don't want to have to repeat your search again. That way you can reference them later. But sort of in this next step here, what we'll do is we'll log into Earth Access and we will download this data. It's typically a little quicker when working with the NetCDFs if you have, especially if you have a slower connection, to just download them instead of trying to stream them. And so we can run this cell to download all those files that we have listed here. And this might take just a little bit of time. I guess, is anybody actually still following along, or need me to slow down, or have any questions? Pause for a second.
If you want to speak up, you can also do a thumbs up or a crying face, or you know, whatever is most appropriate.
I'm following so far. I wanted to ask a question about one step that we did before, the IME calculator. I was wondering what's the difference kind of between the IME value and the other value, the Plume quantification, which if I understood it correctly, we would need like wind speed and other stuff. But can we not just use the IME, or is there any problem with that? Thank you.
So I'll take this one. Yeah, absolutely. The IME calculation is sort of the first of three pieces that you need for the emission quantification, right? So it's basically there's a plume length. If you're using a simple IME method for quantification, it's the IME for the plume, it's the plume length, and there's a wind speed, and it's a pretty simple equation with some unit conversions. So absolutely. You could go that extra step here. We decided not to do that for this tutorial just because there's a lot of the devil's in the details, right, about exactly how you delineate the plume, exactly what winds you're using, how you're calculating your uncertainties. But yes, absolutely. The idea being ultimately what would, you know, we could build off of some of the plots that Eric showed, and instead of having an IME calculation on the y-axis, we could have emissions. That's where we will be going eventually, but we wanted to keep it a little bit simpler for this tutorial.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Great, and we had one other question about what is the revisit time of emit? So Andrew, if you want to just kind of elaborate on that a bit more.
I think it's a tough one, tough question, but we appreciate tough questions. I think it varies depending on, you know, the latitude. If we're at higher latitudes, we have more revisits. Mid latitudes, we have fewer. It also depends on how much coverage we're trying to get in a given year. So I guess the numbers that come to mind are for the primary mission of EMIT, which was focused on the arid regions of the world. I think when I was doing my paper for the first EMIT results, I think and there's a figure that illustrates this. I think at the near the equator, I think on average and over a 1-year mission, it was somewhere between, you know, 3 to 7 revisits per year, or something on that order. You'd have to confirm in the paper. And then at higher latitudes, it could be much higher. It could be in excess of 20, 30 observations. So that gives you a general sense for the kinds of numbers that we're talking about. But again, that's going to change as we call it a target mask. That's changing currently. So those numbers are going to change a little bit, but that gives you a general sense.
And I'll just chime in that those numbers have expanded quite a bit even then since that work was done, and we have locations now even in the mid latitudes that have seen 100 revisits. So the real key is that this varies as a function of the ISS trajectory, as well as the planned location of observation along with the solar geometry. So it's a hard to forecast thing, which is one of the reasons that we can't be as specific about answering that question as we might like to be. How we try to address that is we do post a 8-day forecast for where the next observations will be every week based on the current ISS trajectory. But as Andrew indicated, the space station moves a lot, right? So it's very hard to forecast far into the future.
Great, thank you. And I just dropped the link for the coverage and forecasts location where you can find those forecasts in the chat.
Okay. Well, I'll go back to the tutorial. So after we have those files, we can just list those to see them. And then here we're going to get into something a little more complicated. So we're going to define a function. We have a couple tasks we need to do here. And so what we want to do is take a list of the mask scenes, and then we want to pull out the geometry lookup table and use that to orthorectify the mask as well as the RGB scene as the browse image. And so we're going to do that, and then after that, we're going to select only the cloud flag from the mask file, and then we're going to reproject those onto our common grid, both the mask and our browse image. And then we're going to save those as a geotiff. So that's what this function here does. We can run that, and then that'll produce sort of these additional files. So we'll have just a cloud flag TIFF and a browse, ortho-corrected browse file. So after we run that, that might also take a little bit of time. After that, we can basically do something similar to what we did above with the plumes. We can stack them to build a time series. And so we'll build another X-array time variable, just using the timestamps in these file names. And then we'll stack the quality data as well as the RGB data. And I believe somehow I must have moved this cell. Basically what we're doing here is we're adding a time column to our Plume geodata frame. And we're just doing that so it has the same naming convention, and we can plot it overlaid on top of our quality and RGB figure. So we build our quality figure. Here we're reassigning some values to not a number. And these values, I guess I should explain that. The quality data is binary, and so it's just going to be ones or zeros. 1 means there is a cloud, and 0 means there's not a cloud. So we'll assign 0 or any fill value to not a number, so it's transparent, and then build that figure. And then we'll do the same process for the RGB, except because the data type's different, we're going to assign it a value of 255 where there's no data, and then build a plot for that. And then we can overlay these on top of each other. So we've got a nice figure like this. And so here, this is our bounding box region with an RGB. And then we've got our quality mask overlaid on top of it, along with our bounding box that we use to do our search. And then we're getting this warning here, and this is actually good here. It means that since we're also trying to overlay our plumes on this same figure, that there's not a time index for every single scene. So like the plumes will only appear if there is actually a plume. So we can see that here with this example at our detected plume extent. But if we look through these, we can sort of classify what's happening. So in this scene, there's a lot of clouds. So I would probably say that like potentially that would affect the detection. If we look at this next scene, it was actually acquired on the same day, a couple seconds later, and is barely only touching our search area. So we can just kind of drop that one. So when we do that later. Similarly here, this doesn't really cover a whole lot of our target area. And as we just tab through these, we can sort of classify these differently. This one here is maybe a good example of the onboard cloud masking. You've basically just got this huge black space, which is basically the clouds were obstructing enough of the scene that the data wasn't downlinked from the instrument. And so this date would also be a cloudy date. And then as we look through the rest of these, we'll end up on this date in December, where there's no plume and it's clear. So there's a no detection, but it's clear. And so we can add context to our IME time series by building another data frame. So what we want to do here is we'll take our time index that we use to build this, and we'll basically drop all the dates where we had a detected plume. And so that leaves us with these 8 dates. And then we can further filter those, just like as we scrolled through there, like which index actually had useful data or not. And so I made a category to define that, a category column. And basically indexes 0 and 4 were cloudy, and index 7 was no plume. So we can clean that data frame up, and then we just end up with something like this, which we can merge with our IME data frame. And then we'll simply add a category of plume for that data, and we'll assign like a 0 value for the other dates. And this is maybe a little misleading because it doesn't necessarily mean that there was no methane. It means that it was not detected. And that could be because there was a cloud, or here there was just no plume. So that one might actually be 0. And then we can update our IME scatter plot, and we can just kind of show it side by side with the methane plumes if you want to further examine what a plume looks like for a certain date. Like we can see this one in April here was much larger. I'm just going to zoom out to make this a little bit easier. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe I'm not going to zoom out. You can scroll here and change the time. So like if we look at April, that was this enormous plume. And that matches up with our data here for April 4th.
i.e. landfill, oil and gas, etc.
Yep, it's a great question. And just to clarify, we're not doing that as part of our data offerings to the LP DAAC at this point. And so, but when we do it for internal purposes, and I'd encourage you to do the same. I think you can take the plume imagery and you can infer, where you think the methane emissions are coming from relative to the shape of the plume, the distribution of concentrations, and you can look at, your base map imagery of choice. Typically, that will get you very close to the source. So in this example, if you were to zoom in to the origin point for this plume, it would be quite clear to you, I think, that it is a landfill. You can use ancillary data sets to sort of confirm that is the case. I guess I should step back and say, perhaps it isn't super intuitive for folks that haven't been doing this for 10 years or so, but with a little bit of practice, you'll start to pick this stuff up very quickly. And again, there's databases that exist. Often Google Earth imagery will actually label facilities. So you'll see a landfill, and I've seen this internationally as well. So yeah, base map imagery is key for that.
Great, thanks. And maybe I'll toss this one to Phil. Does EMIT have similar spectral bands to AVERIS?
EMIT has a very similar wavelength range to AVERIS or AVERIS Next Generation, but its sampling is a little bit different. It samples at an approximate 7.5 nanometer resolution with about an 8.5 nanometer full width at half max. So that's a little bit different from AVERIS Next Gen, which is about 5 nanometer wavelength sampling, or AVERIS Classic, which is about a 10 nanometer wavelength sampling. It also has some different fundamental instrument characteristics. It's a different optical design than either of those two. It is a push broom spectrometer that is more similar to AVERIS Next Gen than to AVERIS Classic. But it is almost identical to AVERIS 3, which is just starting to fly, and many of you may see data for in the coming months and years.
Great, thanks. Any other questions on the notebooks here before we switch back to some other kind of wrap-ups? There's a, oh, yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Igor Rubio. I'm a geologist. I'm from northeastern Mexico. So I just want to know if there is a case scenario whenever there is like a merge of plumes from their sources, given their proximity to one another. For example, in a yard of an industrial yard where there are a cluster of emissions. Is there any way to discriminate with the image that you are producing the different layers from different sources that are within a proximity area?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think we can certainly do that in some cases, right? So if we think about this example that's being shared, right, for the landfill, let's just pretend that these were two, there seems to be almost like two plumes here. There could be two smaller emissions that are coming together as a larger emission source. At the 60-meter spatial resolution, in some cases, we can distinguish multiple sources, right, down to pieces of infrastructure. So I think if you were on earlier, I shared that example from Turkmenistan with the video where the plumes were, I guess, fading in, right? In that example, you can resolve 10 different plume locations, 10 different sources, right? Down to individual locations. If the emissions were much smaller than that, and they were very closely packed together, you know, within a few image pixels of one another, each image pixel is a 60-meter spatial. If we had, you know, two plumes and the origin of each was in adjacent pixels, just one pixel apart, it would be basically impossible for us to distinguish those two plumes from one another. So it has everything to do with the size of the plumes in terms of their flux and their distribution spatially. So I'm not sure if that's the answer you're looking for, but it's I guess a nuanced answer. It's difficult, but I would encourage you to maybe take a look at, if you're interested in the New Mexico examples, maybe just look at some of these plumes, and I guess you can convince yourself about what it can and cannot do at that spatial scale.
Okay, thank you. Just can you give further information about those cases in New Mexico? Did you show those right away or previous to this presentation?
So, sorry, go ahead.
Please take it, Dana. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, so there's a variety of locations where you can visualize these data. So one that will link you to the primary data is on our website, but there's also these data sets are available on the Greenhouse Gas Center website as well, where you can actually zoom in and out with these base maps for basically all of the plumes that have been observed so far. So at the end, we're going to put a whole series of resources into the chat here. And so I would just, if you want to just start to visualize and look at those locations, that's a great place to start to just get a sense of the scope of the data that are available. And then there is another question here. Someone is curious if there are any use cases for agriculture in the EMIT data set, particularly for rice paddies. I'm not sure about rice paddies, but I believe we have some agricultural examples. That Andrew, do you want to take that?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, agriculture is of real interest to us. On the airborne side, we've seen agricultural emissions regularly in California, mainly from sources like dairy waste lagoons. We have not published any results from EMIT for dairy waste lagoons because they're very challenging to do at the 60-meter spatial resolution. That being said, you know, we do have a few agricultural examples. One of them is a larger aggregate sort of regional plume in the San Joaquin Valley of California. If you're interested, you can check out that example. And we also have an example of methane emissions from, I believe, a sugar plant with a waste lagoon that is emitting methane, sort of analogous to the dairy waste lagoon example, but more geared towards agriculture. But it is something that's certainly on our minds, and we're always looking for other examples to put into the visualization tools that you've seen.
Great, thanks. Well, then maybe Andrew, you want to take the screen back here, and I think you had.
I had one question that was asked to me specifically. Yeah. So basically, person was asking if the cloud-based functionality in these notebooks will be available after the tutorial. And so these notebooks were designed to also work locally. That's been something we've been trying to put an effort into. So if you go to the EMIT data resources repository, there is a setup instructions which will help you configure a local environment, and everything in these notebooks should, in this whole repository, I believe, should work locally, except there's an S3 access notebook, which is specifically for the cloud.
Great, thank you so much, Eric.
Great. All right. So I think we'll transition to the final section here. So thanks again, everyone, for joining today. I hope you got a sort of a sneak peek of what we're doing with EMIT. I wanted to talk a little bit about where we're planning to go with EMIT results on the calibration and validation, as well as emission quantification front. So we are working very hard to assess different ways to quantify methane emissions with uncertainties. We have a number of methodologies that we're exploring currently. We are looking at observations at different spatial scales using both EMIT and the AVERS-3 instrument. What I'm showing in this figure with these purple plumes here is an actual set of coincident observations where we flew AVERS-3 underneath the EMIT overpass in the Permian Basin and got an acquisition within just a few seconds of one another. So this is a great example where we can test algorithms that were developed with airborne instruments for quantification and see how they perform with EMIT. We're also looking at controlled methane release experiments, both for EMIT and AVERS-3. To date, we've done an AVERS-3 controlled release experiment. So this is when you have a known emission rate on the ground that you can test your algorithms on and compare the derived emission rates with the known values. And this is a nice example, care of a colleague at JPL, Willow Coleman, that shows with the AVERS-3 instrument, we are actually able to see and resolve a methane plume at 7 kilograms per hour that agrees pretty well with the known emission rate. There is a dependence on the plume length in this plot, but this is something that we're exploring. When it comes to validation, as I mentioned before, the controlled release experiments are something that we'll be pursuing as well. We'd like to compare EMIT results with independent methods using different instruments that are estimating emission rates so we can do comparisons. And then ultimately, we're looking for well-instrumented methane sources on the ground that maybe have in situ monitoring stations that are reporting some type of a flux, maybe at an hourly time step or every minute, and we can compare those in situ measurements with our derived emission rates from EMIT. And then finally, just wanted to reiterate that we are focusing on making our data available through the LP DAAC, and thanks to the LP DAAC team for that effort. And we're making all of our code open source and available to anyone who's interested in looking at what we're doing and building on that. All of our data is version tracked, and we really believe that making this data, these data sets transparent is really the first step in building trust with you as data users.
All right, so that wraps us up here today. We are ending basically on time. We'll of course stick around for a minute or two to answer any further questions. But we would love for you to stay engaged with EMIT and EMIT data. I'm going to put some of these links into the chat. We have a very active Slack channel, and we also have our Slack workspace, and then we also have an email list if you'd like to sign up for those to kind of hear about future activities like this. And then also, I'm going to send some resources around the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center, and if you're interested in signing up for information about that, where they're hosting greenhouse gas data from a variety of other different sources and different places. And then I'll post again several of the code resources for you all, so that it's kind of back at the top of everyone's list. But thank everybody so much for being here with us. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks a lot for organizing. It was very useful. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. And we will send this link around to you all as well when it's ready. So
okay, thanks. Thank
you.
So hello, thank you for the interesting workshop. I have a couple of questions which are maybe related to kind of using this data from EMIT with modeling models. I wanted to know if there is some kind of interest in NASA JPL into machine learning research with this data. Perhaps not to make some predictions publicly or something, but perhaps as some sort of guidance for later manual double checking of those detections to kind of filter through the massive amount of data that probably is coming in. And then secondly, I guess connected as well with this first bit is that it really depends on which kind of machine learning tasks would be done. And I wanted to know if there are any kind of labeled datasets that you guys are also working on other tasks of interest. Yeah.
Bill, would you like to go ahead and take that? Andrew had to jump off at this point.
Yeah, I can give that a shot. So yeah, we're extremely interested in machine learning applications for a variety of different components of these data, and in fact, we utilize many different machine learning algorithms in the full chain of the delivery products, all the way from the very early stages of the radiance calculations, all the way through towards the end. I think what you're most likely referring to here is in the detection piece. There's been a decent amount early efforts put forward into the literature on the detection of individual plumes from the match filter outputs, and that's certainly something that we've explored quite a bit here at JPL as well. I think, as you were noting, it's a challenging problem, right? That almost certainly involves humans in the loop, at least for now. There's been a variety of efforts here to help integrate ML methods in some way, shape, or form to help improve the process. But right now, those methods, given the high efficacy rate that's expected, typically also rely a human verification step. The good news is that we are putting out data, quite a bit of data. To your question regarding labeled data sets, we provide a large number of plumes. As Andrew noted, over 1,100 of them have been identified, which is, to our knowledge, all of the high confidence plumes that we've been able to detect within the entire EMIT repository. And those come along with the full match filter results from the output. So this should provide a pretty strong training data set, we hope, for people looking to deploy different models into the future. Hopefully that answered your questions, maybe.
Yeah, okay, amazing. Thank you for the answer. I was wondering also for kind of labels of other types. I know that one of the final products is supposed to be this mineral map. I don't know, maybe apologies for my ignorance, but if this data is also being used as some sort of output of some models, or target for output.
Yeah, that product is certainly also delivered as well, and you can find the data under that if you look for the EMIT. It's called the L2B min product. Again, that's L2B min. I'm sure we can dig up a link and get it into the chat. That provides the mineral identification and band depth quantification for each of, it's well over 100 individual signatures.
Awesome, thank you.
There you go. Link has been dug up. And then we'll take one last question here from the Q&A, which is with regards to the EMIT GHG repository on GitHub, are there any tutorials or documentation on how to use these tools locally?
Not yet, but this is something that we have an eye towards. So I don't have a specific date as to when we'll be able to get that out, but we are looking at getting some further documentation and getting that repository cleaned up a little bit more to make it a little bit more user-friendly for the public. It was one of the things that we moved very quickly on early on and wanted to make it publicly available in whatever state that it was in. As we use it operationally, but we do understand that we have some work to do in order to make that a little bit more user-friendly.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you again to the presenters, and thanks for all of the preparation that went into this. And thank you to all the attendees who are still here, and we're going to stop recording now and sign off. So thank you so much.